This episode of Cell and Gene, the podcast, is brought to you in partnership with Thermo Fisher Scientific and Applied Biosystems' new QualTrack real-time PCR and digital PCR solutions for biopharma. Give your cell and gene therapy development an edge with reliable and accurate qPCR and dPCR workflows backed by a trusted supplier. Explore the complete ecosystem of CGMP-compliant qPCR and dPCR assays, master mixes, and instruments at thermofisher.com/qPCR/biopharma. Hello, listeners, and welcome to this episode of Cell and Gene, the podcast. I'm your host, Erin Harris, and my guest for today's episode is Caplan. She is the CEO of Orgenesis, a biotech that develops and manufactures cell and gene therapies via its very vast pipeline, which we will get into. But Vered, welcome. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So briefly talk us through Orgenesis and its pipeline, specifically starting with immuno-oncology.
Yeah. So first of all, we call it our pipeline, but in ways it's our partner's pipeline, right? It's a partnership model. So if we have someone, a biotech company or hospital chain, they come to us and they want us to do the process development and help them develop their therapy, okay? So sometimes what we do is we just become their industrial partner and we work together on that, right? Sometimes they ask us for additional help. They say, hey, do you mind? We kind of got stuck with this, right? We did our 10 patients and now, we want to continue working on this, but we're not going to raise the $100 million needed to get this to market because we're a hospital and we want to focus on treating our patients, right? So what we do is we in-license it, but then we out-license it to our network, okay? Mm-hmm. So it's really, that's why sometimes people kind of call us an open source biotech, right? Because in some ways, what we're doing is we're putting in our mobile units where we do the manufacturing, right? So we do the processing. We provide all the industrial development, right? In order to get that therapy inside. And then we provide whatever is being run, the algorithm that we're using, the software, right? That has been licensed or not licensed. Doesn't matter if it's our partners program or cellular therapy or one that we've licensed out to them. So, when you look at this field of autologous therapies, they're very much, and I always explain this to people and they kind of say, oh, cells are not manufactured. No, cells are not manufactured. Nobody takes little pieces of peptides and puts them together and builds a cell. What you do is you take a cell from the body and you reprogram it, right? And what you're doing is you're running a process, you're processing the cell. It's actually much more like software. Maybe that's why traditional biotech models don't work here, right? Mm-hmm. So you really have to think of it. You kind of have to switch the way you're looking at this whole industry. What you're doing is you want to have great hardware, very convenient to use. You want to have user-friendly software, right? You want the processes that you're running to be very easy for technicians to run, right? You want it to be simple. And you want to make sure whatever you're doing in each location is exactly the same. You always want to run the same program, so to speak. So when you ask me a pipeline, it's a little bit kind of, again, if you're looking, we're trying to use biotech words, right? For an industry that's new biotech. It's personalized medicine. It's very different from what you have in the traditional biotech world. So a lot of the names and titles don't exactly fit, but it's what we have. So it's what we use.
I see. I got it. I got you. Well, and we will be talking more about certainly the manufacturing component of this and the automation, digitization as we go on. But before we do, you mentioned certainly the autologous therapy component to this. And, heavy emphasis does really continue to be placed on the future of allogeneic therapies. And I want to learn more about Orgenesis' commitment to autologous therapies. So talk us through that.
So look, I love autologous therapies. And one of the things that we really want to do, we really want to enable autologous therapies. Why? Because when you're dealing with cells, the self is very strong, right? When you take your own T cells, your own MSC cells, your own pancreatic cells, they are yours. You were born and raised. They're very well adapted to the social environment they come from, right? And there's a lot of talk about allogeneic, and allogeneic has a place in this industry, but it's a place that I would say, first of all, it's certainly not a shelf product. It's not a solution that solves all the challenges. In many cases, you're still working with very small batches and from one patient to another. So I would say it's personalized, right? Because you can have an allogeneic from, say, your cousin being transplanted, but that's still personalized, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a shelf product. And even if you're pooling cells together to give to a certain population, again, it's not a big facility manufacturing something. It's cells being adapted, but it's usually very small batches. And even when people talk about iPSCs, right, the pluripotent cells, well, look at the work being done in diabetes. They have to be encapsulated. They have a very kind of the person-to-person thing, right? So allogeneic is not the secret word that's going to solve everything in cell and gene therapy, not at all. I think there is a space for these therapies, but maybe for an acute kind of thing where you don't have time to prepare the cells, maybe it's an add-on for long-term care after you've done an autologous. And in many cases, you're seeing a very interesting combination. For instance, you have a cell line, allogeneic, but the manipulation is autologous. And in other cases, you see another thing, right? You see like an allogeneic component added to an autologous cell. So it's not kind of this clear-cut world, autologous, allogeneic. It's more about having a choice, enabling autologous. The autologous is the basis. That's what you're using. You're using patient cells. And when you look at the clinical data, that's what's been clinically effective. It's very straightforward. The reason people are moving away or thinking, oh, we have to change autologous is not because it's not been clinically efficient. It's been incredibly clinically efficient. It's because it doesn't fit the standard biotech industrial model, okay? So instead of trying to take something that works clinically wonderful and change it so it fits an industrial approach that's not built for it, maybe it's better to build the correct industrial approach for a really good clinical solution, right? So that's kind of why we're dedicated to autologous, because they work. Very simple.
Sure,
And
very, very proven, yes. And it's interesting that you bring up so the typical biotech model approach. I'm glad you brought that up because I want to transition this conversation to, the manufacturing at the point of care, and we'll get to your Ample mobile lab in a second, but let's work our way there. So Orgenesis is focused on you provide cell and gene therapies that can be manufactured at the point of care.
yes.
And you're working with hospitals and healthcare providers to enable them to participate in this development on their sites and providing these therapies in-house by adapting them to this closed system manufacturing rather than relying on what we were talking about, the typical biotech model.
Yes.
So talk us through this at the point of care, closed system manufacturing. How is that working for you?
So, we came from traditional kind of approach, right? We used to have master cell. We were providing therapies. I think we were one of the biggest service provider in Europe. We expanded later on to the US. And that model, is very helpful, especially in the initial kind of stages, but it doesn't build up the transition when you need thousands, millions of patients. And that's where we're hoping to get to, right? We want a model that from day one, we're thinking, okay, because, people talk about the cost of these therapies. Yes, the cost is very expensive, but that's only one issue. the capacity, the lack of capacity, the lack of availability. So you have affordability, which is a big issue. You have availability and you have access, right? If you're manufacturing in the US, how are you going to get this to people in India? What Indian kids should not have cell and gene therapies? Of course they should. So that's kind of how we look at it. We look at it, the problems here, the three problems. Okay, one is the cost, and how do you address cost issues? So if you look at the cost of centralized processing of these cells, and you notice I'm not saying manufacturing, but processing of these cells, you look at the cost components. You see a big cost component is the logistics, okay? Sending it back and forth. Every time you have to ship it, you have to do all the quality control, you have to do all the testing again, you have additional risk. So and it's when you're bringing in the source material and when you're sending the final product back, right? You've got double bucket of cost on that. If you can bring it closer to where the patients are, you've already reduced a nice cost, okay? Second thing is, when you work in clean rooms, in traditional clean rooms, you have this cross contamination issue, right? You can't put two patients together, especially not in an open system, because you will have cross contamination. Okay, so the second issue you want to take care of is how do you always develop processes that can be put in closed system so you can have in the same space, whether it's a clean room or an ampule or wherever, you can have parallel processing, right? You're not doing one patient and waiting for that to finish in the next one, okay? So that's a second big cost bucket. So if you can enable closed system processing, even if not the whole process, maybe the transaction you're still doing manually, just the expansion, which sometimes takes 2 to 3 weeks, right? If you can, even that component, closed loop, and then you can put these kind of units one next to another, and one technician instead of all these 5 people you have working in the clean room waiting for these cells to nicely expand, you've already saved a huge amount of money, right? So that's second component. You want closed system, you want parallel processing, just as you would in a good software system, right? You want the system to work in parallel because you're utilizing resources in a better way. Third issue that you have, okay, is everything that has to do with people. People are a risk factor when they go into clean rooms. They're like the worst contaminants, okay? Because we're alive, right? And no matter how much you dust them up, everything, there's still a risk factor. And people in a clean room are expensive, and people in a processing unit are expensive, so you want to minimize that. Doesn't mean you don't need to hire people, but they could be doing much better work and sophisticated work of analyzing data, looking at how to optimize processes and how to develop better processes, right? So what you have these 3 big cost buckets. So if you can bring the process close to the patient, if you can allow parallel processing, and if you can minimize the human component in the processing part, maybe not in QC, maybe not in things that are going out of the clean room environment, you know what? You've already reduced a huge amount of cost. But now you also want availability, right? Okay, you've made it more affordable. Now you want availability. In order to make this available quickly to patients or anywhere needed, you need to unitize. You need to take the biology and make it one unit together with the engineering around it. The example I give to people, that these therapies are very much like home cooking, okay? They're developed by wonderful scientists and research centers that are addicted to pipetting away, right? And you need to turn this into an industrial process. And the example I give people is, let's say you know how to make a wonderful, wonderful apple pie. That's great. But if you want to open a chain of apple pies across the continent, you better have a very good apple pie making machine, or you're in trouble, right? Mm-hmm. And forget having the apple pie not as tasty. But here you have a big risk issue as well. So that means failed batches. That means patients not getting the batches they needed. And again, a cost issue because every failed batch is an overhead cost. So that's what you need. You need to unitize. So you need to bring it closer. Not in every case. You need to have a choice to bring it closer to where the patient is, to have flexibility where you place these units. You need to have closed loop and parallel processing. You have to have as much automation as possible in order to minimize human intervention. And you have to unitize the biology with the engineering so you have one unit, because once that's qualified, once that's validated, it's very easy to duplicate it. It's easy to take more units, kind of isolation units, and put them in an ampule so you can already quickly expand capacity. It's easy to bring, once you've qualified that ampule with those units, to bring in another ampule to the same location. And then we talk about accessibility. You should be able to very easily bring that same ampule to another location where you want to work. Okay? And people think of point of care as, oh, you've got to put the box 5 minutes away from the clinician. Not at all. As long as you don't have to freeze down the product, you're close enough. As long as you have even a 6-hour time between locations, that's fine. As long as you don't have to kind of reprocess the product or the starting material, you're close enough. So the way we work is we set up hubs, and these hubs do everything you would do for making a drug, right? They do the quality assurance, the training, the quality control. And then we do everything like we did before. One big difference, we don't do processing. We don't actually make products there. That we unitize and we make in the ampoules. And then we can put them close to the hub or closer to the hospital, but you have a choice. You can expand, and if you want, and we have these hubs all across the globe, and these hubs carry kind of the overhead, and they leave a lot of flexibility, right?
Sure, sure. And I want to, so you've of course referred to OMPUL. That is the Orgenesis Mobile Processing Unit and Lab,
Yep.
for our listeners. And they're mobile labs that, as far as I understand, and certainly based on this conversation, it's using digitalization, excuse me, and automation technology. And
And
you're
closed
going to enclose it,
isolated units inside, right?
right, right, and to the point of care.
Yep.
And um, so, and you mentioned there are hubs sort of all around the world.
Mhm.
How many hubs do you have?
I think we have around 10 today. Like
Okay.
you need one, we have one in Greece, one in Israel, one in Belgium, one in Italy, in Spain, next to JHU, one at UC Davis, Sacramento, one in Boston. We're building out in the US now more. We have in Korea. We really try to make these therapies available everywhere, right?
Good, good. Now, I want to talk generally about digitalization and automation technology in cell and gene therapy manufacturing. You know, where are we and what is next in those two components? Like what should, biotechs be doing and looking out for in terms of digitalization and automation technology?
So, again, when we started working in this space, there was very little kind of technology development. And we really tried to work with every kind of most of the industry partners out there that are developing automation solutions, closed loop solutions. We have had to develop some of it ourselves because there just wasn't anything out there. But I do think the best approach here, a lot of companies I see them, they think, oh, there'll be one box fits all. Okay. Like there'll be one closed system and it can do everything. It can do all CAR Ts, it can do all, T cell types, NK cell types. Or that for me, I don't think that makes sense. These therapies are very diverse. And remember, this is a new field, right? Things go very quickly. So when you talk about kind of automation, closed loop system control, what you're looking at, you want to have a basic kind of control unit, and then you want to have components that you can put together. And, we're agnostic to whatever technology. We take the best technologies that can fit that specific therapy or that specific process. And then we kind of put it together. And you don't have to do 100%. That's the whole idea of these arms. If you're starting a phase 1, maybe you're only closed loop or automated your expansion process. You have time. Get the quality control analytics side, right? Make sure you know exactly what you need to measure. You still have a component, a clean room or clean space or clean environment, space where you can do some manual manipulation if needed. Okay. So again, not everything at one time and not everything in one unit, because maybe it makes sense to do the expansion automation units, and then each time one expansion process is finished, it can go into one separation or filtering or downstream unit and fill and finish unit. So I think really about this space, especially because you're talking about these small batches, a modular approach is very important.
Sure.
Right? And for modular approach to work, things need to work together. And we try to be that hub, right? We try to be that component that if this company is doing a great expansion, and this one's doing a selection, and this one's doing a quality control unit that's automated and something like that, we can just make sure everything fits together and easy to piece together, almost like a Lego kind of kit, right? And that's why you need a network. That's why you need a lot of integration in this business. Because instead, there's going to be a lot of these therapies. The growth is unbelievable. And the growth is so, and I think the reason for that is just because of more data, right? Just think we're in the data information revolution, right? I remember when we started, there were 10 therapies being in the clinic. Now there's thousands.
Mm-hmm.
I used to try to read every week the new therapies. I was reading 10 articles a week about new things that were coming out. Now there's like 10 articles a minute.
Right.
Now I read the reviews of the, kind of whoever went through everything. And you just can't analyze enough of it, right? Because there's so much information coming in. So you want flexibility, right? Today you're using a car like this. Tomorrow you're using a car. A car is the chimeric antigen. Kind of, it's a component, not a car for the CAR T, right? So if today you want to add one, and next you have a new thing coming in, and you want to add something that's more sophisticated, or you suddenly want to use a different lentivirus, or you want to use a different transduction technology. You don't want to take your whole process and throw it out. You want to make sure you can very easily change modules, fit it all together, and move ahead. So that's
sure.
kind of on this field. But there's been tremendous work. I mean, a lot of companies, big, small, are developing all kinds of units. But I think the mindset, they're all trying to make one thing that'll solve every solution. No need. If you could just make one thing that works, you have a market, you have customers, you have companies and patients who need this, and it can be integrated.
Sure. I want to, as you bring especially the OMPUL hubs into the US, talk to us a little bit about in terms of the business model and that makes the point of care supply and validation efficient. And what I mean by that is, like how concerned are you, or are you concerned about the partnership between the biotech, the company, and the hospital, the clinic, what have you? What does that look like? Are there any concerns, especially as you come into the US?
So it's interesting because you see what's happened in Europe, right? For a lot of the CAR T, the therapies, the hospitals have kind of mutinized, say, no, we're going to do our own, right? We don't want to pay that much. We don't want to, there's not enough reimbursement. We want to be reimbursed if we can make it ourselves. Of course, not every hospital can make the product itself. So, okay, we can partner with the hospitals. We can enable them to make products they've developed, that they have. In the US, it's a bit different because, first of all, you're not looking at a hospital exemption. I have heard kind of hospitals talking about hospital change, saying, oh, we'll just do our own BLA for our CAR-T CD19, right? I don't know if that's going to happen. I think that's a bit, I think it's more kind of focused on investigator-initiated trials that just go on forever instead of just buying products. And I think hospitals in general want to buy products in biotech. Where does the problem begin? The problem begins when they can't get it, right? If, for instance, you have a reimbursement system that is reimbursing a CD19 only upon success, I mean, think of the biotech companies. They're put in a very difficult position. Well, you know, they can't go bankrupt. They have to make a living. So they need to kind of make this terrible choice. Am I going to treat this patient? What are his chances to get well and for us to get paid for this product we deliver, right? That's a difficult situation. And there the hospitals come in and say, well, if you can't provide me a product because you don't think I want to run an investigator-initiated, I'll try to do this under some kind of other regulatory way so I can get these products to the patients who maybe are more ill or have less of a chance, right? And in some cases, it's also a matter that you have these therapies are becoming more and more kind of individualized, right? Now it's okay. Now it's not only if you have this specific antigen or whatever. Now it's, do you have this specific, and when you get to the gene therapies, it's even a bigger problem, right? Of sometimes very rare diseases. So then you have the hospital saying, wait, I mean, a biotech company is not going to develop this for me. I'm not going to, because it's maybe not enough patient populations, maybe there's not some kind of organization that's going to pay them to do it. So they say, okay, we'll develop it. We'll treat the patients. And again, you come back to the manufacturing processing issue, how they're not built, most hospitals, to do processing. They're built to treat patients. So if you can come and give them a very simple solution, then good, now they have a solution. Now we can make the product for them next to the hospital. You don't need a big investment into a manufacturing facility. You can just put one OMPUL, right? So that's kind of the problems you see in terms of kind of biotech. It's not that, oh, big bad biotech, not at all. I mean, I think biotech companies are doing a great job trying to get these therapies to patients, but they have to exist economically, right? And the hospitals have their own budget constraints, right? And they want to treat patients. And there's a lot of demand from patients. Patients today, they go on the internet, they read about these new therapies, they wanna get the treatments. I think this will even out but again, the basic problem to solve here is not, oh, why are they not only a certain patients are getting reimbursed, is to reduce the cost and allow for availability. Again, it's an industrial problem. It reflects on clinical problems, on reimbursement, on economic, but it is an engineering industrial issue that needs to be resolved, right? You resolve that, everything falls into place. Biotechs can happily make the products for the hospitals wherever they're needed, close by. They can come to us, we can make the products for them. They have a choice. They have a capacity built out.
Sure. You make it sound very easy. I think that's great.
Well, it's not about easy. It's about, that's what happens. And sometimes I try to explain this to people. It's like before there was an internet, you didn't need an internet provider, right? You just didn't need one. Now you need service providers, right? You need somebody to enable the expansion of that information to go out to as many people as possible, correct?
Sure.
So what are we actually, I would say, kind of commercializing here? What are we, not in a bad way. I think commercializing something is making it available to people. It's a good thing, right? What are we, in lack of a better word, selling here? Okay, we're selling information, right? The wonderful science that's been developed on how to process a cell in a way that is clinically beneficial for a patient, right?
Sure.
And you want to be able to use that wonderful information and make it available at as many locations as you need, right? That's what you want. And in order to make that information available, you have to have the right kind of systems to deploy that information.
Right. Right. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you. This has been really, really helpful and very, especially in terms of the mobile unit, the OMPL, all information that is exceptionally helpful to cell and gene readers and listeners. So thank you.
Maybe I'll just add one more point on the
Sure.
mobile unit side. People think, these mobile units are running around in trucks and today are parked here. Well, it doesn't work like that. What I'm saying, a mobile unit allows you a choice. You can put 20 of these in a warehouse if you want to have centralized, but you can still build up capacity very quickly. I mean, building clean rooms takes 2-3 years. Company finishes its phase 1, it's stuck. Now it's got to wait 2 years. It's got to build a new clean room or find a new service provider. So it's about having a choice and flexibility that, okay, I can add now more units. I can utilize same overhead, but I've got much more processing power, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I can put this unit in another location. I want to expand from the US to Europe. I don't have to build another facility for 3 years. No, 3 months, I've got a mobile unit located in Europe and I can do the same job there.
Right.
Okay.
A very streamlined and flexible operation for sure.
Yep.
Okay, we've come to sort of the formal end of our conversation, and I like to talk to my guests about who they are when they're not in the office or the lab. And in doing my research on you and your background, you seem to be a very serial entrepreneur, which is very, very intriguing. You founded and led more than 15 companies in diagnostics, over-the-counter products, pharmaceuticals, you name it. It seems to be endless. What do you find so fascinating about being an entrepreneur?
Well, I remember I read something that Yehuda Menuhin said, like, violence. He said, an artist is someone that can't help but create.
Right.
It's just stronger than him, And, I love science. I love engineering. I love biology. I really love it. I'm always fascinated by the beauty of it. It has like its own aesthetics. It's like the beauty of the world, right? And just like any beauty in the world, I mean, it has these patterns and this information, right? That's in there. And you can learn from what nature does. And just like I would say a painter, and I do like painting, or a sculpture, they look at something and it's beautiful. And they want to share that experience of beauty. And they want others to share it, kind of to enjoy that. It's kind of part of our communications with the world. So for me, people will tell you it's an obsession. It's not even a passion. I mean, I see this beautiful, beautiful science of reprogramming cells. It is beautiful science. It's the way we talk to ourselves. I mean, think of some people say to me, oh, we're living in a matrix. Well, it's a place where we enter the matrix, right? Where we get to reprogram what we are.
Sure.
And we become like part of our next kind of evolution, I would say, as a species. And there's so much advancements on it. And when I see this and I say, what everybody, every human should share that beauty, right? Should share that science. And even on an economic level, this was developed NIH grants, university grants. I mean, we all own it. The source material is coming from our own body, our own human information. What's more human than that? That belongs to all of us, right? Our genes, our cells, all kinds of pathways and things that are part of us. And to see that beauty limited by cost, limited by things, it's just such a shame, right? And I love bringing technology to clinical practice. I love bringing good science to clinical practice. It's always a fearsome journey, the journey of the warrior. It's always, you really have to deal with a lot of challenges. But when you always keep in your mind what the end goal is, well, what you're sharing is the beauty that we create to everyone. That's, I would say, very motivating, and just makes you kind of get up every day and
And keep
go for
going,
it.
right?
Yeah,
That's so wonderful, you put it so beautifully. So thank you. And I think certainly with regard to Orgenesis, I mean, really, it's very forward thinking, very progressive, and I think you know we're certainly glad at whatever point you've from your entrepreneurial background you founded Orgenesis. So that's great.
yeah. I've started it, actually. It was a very niche area. I was interested in it academically. I honestly thought it was going to be a hobby. It just grew and grew and
Yeah,
grew.
I'll say.
And it's become so important to all of us,
Sure.
right?
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you very much for that explanation too.
Yeah.
What a very so interesting. Well, listeners, that wraps up this episode of Cell and Gene, the podcast. And I want to thank again Vered Caplan, the CEO of Orgenesis, for your time and all of the insight you shared today. This was great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening.
Visit Cell and Gene to sign up for our newsletter and tell your peers about Cell and Gene, the podcast, so they can subscribe too. We'll talk to you soon.